It all began with a dream. A vivid, almost cinematic dream that woke me up in a cold sweat. In it, Ashley was standing in a field of broken glass, wearing that crimson dress I bought her last Christmas. She was smiling, but not at me. Behind her was a faceless shadow, tall and imposing, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder. I jolted awake, heart racing. I don't usually remember my dreams, but this one stayed with me like an itch I couldn't scratch. It felt absurd to even think about it, but something gnawed at me for days afterward. Ashley noticed. "Bad dreams again?" she asked one morning, pouring her coffee with her usual grace. She had this uncanny ability to look effortless even at 7 a.m. in a bathrobe. I nodded, trying to shake it off. "Yeah, just a weird one." She didn't press. Instead, she kissed my cheek and went about her morning as though nothing was wrong. But something was wrong. I just didn't know what yet. The first real sign hit me like a sucker punch 2 weeks later. I came home early from work, a random client cancellation, and found the house unusually quiet. No sound of Ethan playing in the living room, no Ashley humming while she cleaned. Then I heard it, a soft laugh coming from the kitchen. I walked in, expecting to see her on the phone, but she wasn't. She was leaning against the counter, her face flushed, holding a glass of wine. At 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. "Oh," she said, startled. "You're home early." "Yeah, surprise," I replied, forcing a smile. "What's the occasion?" Her eyes darted to her phone on the counter, as if it had the answer she couldn't think of. "Just had a rough day. Needed a little me time. You know?" Ashley didn't drink during the day. Ever. Not even at brunches with her friends. I didn't push it, but the seed of suspicion was firmly planted. The next incident was stranger. It was a Saturday morning, and Ashley had been out late the night before. Some work dinner she'd barely mentioned. I was in the garage fixing Ethan's bike when I found a crumpled receipt shoved into the glove compartment of her car. It was from a fancy restaurant downtown, dated the night before. The receipt listed 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, and dessert. Ashley doesn't order dessert. She's always been the skip sweets to fit into my jeans type. I didn't mention the receipt right away. Instead, I waited. That evening, I casually asked, "How was the work dinner? You guys go anywhere nice?" "Not really," she said, not missing a beat. "Some dive bar downtown. You know how it is, cheap beer, greasy food. Nothing special." She lied. And she lied without even blinking. I kept my cool, but inside something snapped. Ashley wasn't just acting distant. She was hiding something. I couldn't shake the thought of that receipt, her flushed face in the kitchen, or the way she'd been glued to her phone lately. The breaking point came a few days later. I was driving to pick up Ethan from school when my phone buzzed. It was a text from one of our neighbors, Brad. "Hey man, not trying to stir the pot, but thought you should know I saw Ashley downtown yesterday. She was with some guy, didn't look like work stuff. Sorry if I'm overstepping." I nearly swerved off the road. Brad wasn't the kind of guy to start drama. If he'd seen something, it had to be real. When I got home, Ashley was in the backyard, watering her garden like everything was fine. I stood there for a moment watching her. How could someone look so serene, so completely normal, when they were clearly living a double life? I didn't confront her then. Instead, I did something I never thought I'd do. I started digging, checking her phone when she was in the shower, looking through her email. I felt sick doing it, but the more I searched, the more cracks I found. Deleted messages, strange calendar entries, a contact saved as Kelly that didn't seem to actually be a woman. I didn't have the full picture yet, but I knew one thing for sure. The Ashley I thought I knew was gone, and I was about to find out just how deep the rabbit hole went. After days of playing the quiet detective, I knew I had to act. The phone, the receipts, the neighbor's text. Everything pointed to something I couldn't ignore. But I needed undeniable proof. Confronting her too early without it would just give her the chance to twist the story, and I wasn't about to let that happen. That Saturday, Ashley told me she was going out with Kayla again. "We're doing a girls' spa day," she said, slipping into a floral sundress. "I'll be back late. Don't wait up." Her tone was light, almost rehearsed. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and rushed out the door, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume. I stood there for a moment, clutching my keys in one hand and my resolve in the other. I followed her. I know it sounds crazy. I've never done anything like this in my life, but the situation wasn't normal. My heart was pounding as I tailed her car, keeping a safe distance. She wasn't heading toward the spa or anywhere near Kayla's neighborhood. Instead, she drove to a small, trendy bar on the edge of downtown. From the safety of my car, I watched her step out and check her reflection in the window of her car. She smoothed her dress, adjusted her hair, and then walked inside. Alone. I waited for 5 minutes, 10, 15, and then he arrived. A tall man in his late 30s, dark-haired, sharp-dressed, and overly confident in the way he moved. He didn't hesitate as he walked into the bar. I felt my stomach turn to lead when, just moments later, I caught sight of them through the glass window. Ashley was leaning into him, her hand on his arm, laughing at something he'd said. Couldn't breathe. The sight of her, so comfortable with someone else, was like a slap in the face. I got out of the car and walked to a shadowed spot near the entrance. I couldn't go inside without causing a scene, but I needed more. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos. Blurry, but enough to show what was happening. And then it happened. They kissed. I froze. She kissed him, not in a casual, "good to see you" way, but with intense passion. The kind of kiss she used to give me when we were dating, back when she looked at me like I was her whole world. My hand slipped, and I accidentally dropped my phone. It hit the concrete with a thud, loud enough to draw Ashley's attention. She turned her head sharply, her eyes scanning the area outside the window. And then, she saw me. Her expression shifted in an instant, from surprise to horror, then quickly to defiance. She pulled away from the man, said something to him, and walked out of the bar toward me. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, crossing her arms defensively. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, my voice low and controlled, though my insides were screaming. "Who's the guy?" Her lips tightened. She glanced back at the bar, as if debating whether to run back inside. But then she straightened her posture and threw me the most infuriating excuse I'd ever heard. "It's not what it looks like. That was a friendly kiss. He's just an old friend." A friendly kiss? My head spun. I took a deep breath, trying not to lose it in the middle of the street. "Friendly? You don't kiss your friends like that, Ashley. Don't insult me." She rolled her eyes, stepping closer as if she were the one who had the right to be angry. "You're overreacting. Let's just go home and talk about this." "I'm not doing this here." Her tone was so cold, so dismissive, that it hit me harder than the kiss itself. "Go home," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "You want to go home after this? Like everything's fine." But she didn't answer. She brushed past me, her heels clicking on the pavement, heading for her car like I was some stranger harassing her on the street. I stood there, watching her drive off without looking back. I had the photos. I had the proof. But in that moment, I realized something much worse than the betrayal itself. Ashley didn't care. I drove home in silence. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Ashley had left me standing there like I was the one in the wrong, and that smug, dismissive attitude played in my head on a loop the entire way back. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my thoughts were a storm. When Ashley finally got home 2 hours later, she walked in like nothing had happened. She kicked off her heels at the door, glanced at me sitting on the couch and said, "We'll talk about it after Ethan goes to bed." I couldn't believe her audacity. "No, Ashley," I said, standing up. "We're talking about it now." She froze mid-step, finally giving me her full attention. "Jake," she said, her voice calm but dripping with condescension, "I'm not doing this in front of our son." Ethan was upstairs in his room playing video games. He couldn't hear us, but that wasn't the point. Ashley wasn't worried about Ethan. She was trying to buy time, trying to figure out her next move. "Don't pull that card," I snapped. "You're stalling because you don't want to answer for what I saw today." She sighed, dropping her purse onto the kitchen counter with a loud thud. "Fine. You want to talk? Let's talk. But you need to stop being so dramatic, Jake." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "Dramatic? I caught you kissing another man, Ashley. How am I supposed to react?" Her expression hardened. She crossed her arms and leaned against the counter, looking at me like I was the one inconveniencing her. "It wasn't what you think," she said flatly. "Then explain it to me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who is he? What are you doing sneaking off with him? And don't you dare say it's a friendly kiss again." She hesitated, her eyes darting away for a split second. That was all the confirmation I needed. She was trying to come up with a story. "His name is Eric," she said finally. "We've been friends for years. He's going through a tough time, and I've been supporting him. That's all it is." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Support? Is that what we're calling it now? Ashley, you don't support friends by lying to your husband, sneaking around, and making out in bars. Try again." Her face twisted with frustration. "You're impossible," she spat. "I told you the truth, but you've already decided I'm some kind of villain, haven't you?" "Yes, Ashley," I said, my voice rising. "Because you're acting like one. You've been lying to me, and now you're trying to gaslight me into thinking this is all in my head." That struck a nerve. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might actually admit to something. But instead, she took a different approach, one that left me stunned. "You know what, Jake?" she snapped. "Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't need to spend time with someone who actually makes me feel alive." Felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Boring," I repeated, barely able to process what I was hearing. "Yes, boring," she shouted, throwing her hands up. "All you do is work, come home, and expect everything to stay the same. I need more than that, Jake. I deserve more." Her words hit like a freight train, but what shocked me more was the way she said them. There was no remorse, no hesitation. She meant every word. "So that's your excuse?" I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You're cheating because I don't entertain you enough? Because I'm too focused on keeping this family afloat?" She rolled her eyes, exhaling sharply. "You're twisting my words. I'm just saying, maybe if you paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere for it." For a moment, I couldn't even speak. The sheer cruelty of her statement left me reeling. "You're unbelievable," I said finally. "After everything I've done for you, for us, you have the nerve to blame me for this?" Ashley shrugged, as if this was just another petty argument about leaving the toilet seat up. "Believe what you want, Jake. I'm done arguing with you." And with that, she walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs, leaving me standing there in stunned silence. I wanted to follow her, to demand answers, to force her to admit the truth. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. Ashley wasn't sorry. She didn't care about what she'd done or how it was affecting me. I sat down on the couch, my head in my hands, and tried to make sense of the woman I'd married. The Ashley I loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't even recognize. And for the first time, I started to wonder if she'd ever really been there at all. The next morning was suffocating. Ashley moved around the house like nothing had happened, humming softly as she packed Ethan's lunch and brushed crumbs off the counter. It was surreal, watching her carry on with her routine while the weight of her betrayal hung in the air like a dark cloud. I couldn't take it anymore. After Ethan left for school, I cornered her in the kitchen. She was scrolling through her phone, probably texting Eric, for all I knew, and sipping her coffee. "We're not done talking about this," I said firmly, my voice breaking the false calm she'd wrapped herself in. She didn't even look up. "Jake, I told you everything last night. You're just dragging this out now." I stepped closer, refusing to let her brush me off again. "Don't insult my intelligence, Ashley. You think I'm stupid? That I didn't notice the changes, the lies, the sneaking around?" Her fingers tightened around her coffee mug, but she kept her eyes on the screen. "What do you want me to say, Jake? That I'm a terrible wife? That you're some saint who did nothing wrong?" "I want the truth," I snapped. "The real truth, Ashley. Not the garbage you fed me last night. Who is Eric to you? How long has this been going on? And how far has it gone?" That got her attention. She set the mug down with a deliberate thud and finally met my eyes. For the first time, there was a flicker of something real in her expression. Not guilt, but defiance. "Fine," she said, her voice icy. "You want the truth? Eric and I have been close. He's someone who actually listens to me, makes me feel valued. Unlike you, Jake." "Close," I repeated, my stomach churning. "That's your word for it?" Clothes? You kissed him, Ashley. God knows what else you've done. She smirked, and the sight of it made my blood boil. You really want the details, don't you? You want to torture yourself with every little thing. Well, sorry to disappoint, but it's none of your business. None of my business? I said, incredulous. You're my wife, Ashley. You made vows. You don't get to decide that your betrayal is none of my business. She leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, and shrugged like this was some minor inconvenience she had to endure. You're so dramatic, Jake. Maybe if you spent less time obsessing over what I'm doing and more time fixing what's wrong with you, we wouldn't be in this mess. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't just unapologetic. She was turning it all on me, like I'd driven her to cheat. What's wrong with me? I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. You mean working overtime to pay for this house? For Ethan's school? For your damn spa days? Yeah, Ashley. I guess I'm guilty of trying to keep this family afloat while you're out playing pretend with Eric. Her face hardened. There it is. The martyr act. Poor Jake. The perfect husband. Always sacrificing everything, while his horrible wife has the audacity to want more. More. I repeated, my voice rising. What the hell is more, Ashley? What exactly did I fail to give you that justified this? She hesitated, just for a moment, and in that hesitation, I saw it. She wasn't going to answer because the truth wouldn't make her look like the victim she so desperately wanted to be. Forget it, she said, brushing past me. I'm not doing this with you. I grabbed her arm. Not hard, but enough to stop her. No, I said firmly. You don't get to walk away this time. You owe me the truth, Ashley. Not excuses, not deflections. The truth. She pulled her arm free and turned to face me, her eyes blazing. Fine. You want the truth? I don't love you anymore, Jake. There it is. Happy now. The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at her, waiting for some sign that she didn't mean it, that it was just something she'd said in anger. But her face was stone. You don't mean that, I said, my voice barely a whisper. You're just trying to hurt me because you're backed into a corner. She laughed. Actually laughed. God, you're pathetic. Always trying to make it about what I'm doing wrong instead of looking at yourself. Face it, Jake. This marriage has been dead for a long time. You just didn't notice because you were too busy playing the hero. I stepped back, the weight of her words crushing me. 4 years. I'd believed in the life we'd built together. I'd fought for it, sacrificed for it. And now, she was standing in front of me, telling me it had all been a lie. But as the shock wore off, a new feeling began to rise in me. One I hadn't expected. It wasn't just anger or sadness. It was clarity. Ashley had shown me exactly who she was. The question now was what I was going to do about it. Ashley's words echoed in my head long after she stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I don't love you anymore. It was the kind of sentence that leaves a permanent scar. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, my chest heavy with a mix of fury and heartbreak. For years, I'd poured everything I had into our life together. The late nights, the sacrifices, the compromises, all of it. And now, she stood there, blaming me for her affair, twisting the knife as if she was the victim. I wasn't going to let her rewrite the narrative, not this time. I got up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a drink. Bourbon straight. I wasn't much of a drinker, but tonight wasn't about relaxing. It was about grounding myself for what I needed to do next. Ashley eventually came downstairs, her expression guarded but defiant. She was dressed for a run, leggings, a tank top, her hair tied back. I recognized the outfit. It was the one she always wore on her Saturday morning jogs. The same jogs that I now suspected were just a cover for her meetings with Eric. I'm going out, she said flatly, not even looking at me. I stepped into her path, blocking the door. No, you're not. She tilted her head, glaring at me like I was some unruly child. Excuse me? We're not done here, Ashley, I said, my voice steady but firm. You don't get to drop a bomb like that and then walk out like nothing happened. She crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. What's the point, Jake? You're not going to listen to me anyway. You've already made up your mind about what kind of person I am. I let out a bitter laugh. You made that pretty easy for me when you started sneaking around with another man. Don't act like I'm the unreasonable one here. Her eyes narrowed. This is exactly why I can't talk to you. You twist everything to make yourself the victim. And you twist everything to avoid accountability. I shot back. You've been lying to me for months, Ashley. You've humiliated me, disrespected me, and now you're standing here pretending like I'm the problem? No, not this time. She took a step back, her arms dropping to her sides. For the first time, she looked genuinely caught off guard. What do you want from me, Jake? She asked, her voice quieter now. You want me to say I'm sorry? Fine, I'm sorry. But it doesn't change anything. No, I said, shaking my head. You don't get to brush this off with a half-hearted apology. You owe me the truth. The real truth, Ashley. Her eyes flickered with something. Fear? Guilt? Maybe both. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. Let me make this simple, I said. You tell me everything, when it started, how far it went, all of it, or you pack a bag and leave. Tonight. She stared at me, her expression hardening again. You're giving me ultimatums now? You're damn right I am, I said, my voice rising. Because I'm done playing games. I'm done letting you manipulate me, lie to me, and treat me like I'm nothing. For a moment, we stood there in silence, the tension thick enough to choke on. Then, finally, she sighed and sat down at the dining table. It started 6 months ago, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Eric's an old friend from college. We reconnected at a conference. 6 months. Half a year of deceit. My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm. Keep going, I said. At first, it was just texting, she continued, talking about old times, catching up. But then, I don't know, Jake, felt nice. He made me feel like I mattered. Did I ever make you feel like you didn't? I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't answer. When did it turn physical? I demanded. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. A couple of months ago, she finally said. We met for lunch one day, and it just happened. It just happened. The phrase felt like acid burning through my veins. How many times? I pressed. Jake, does it really? How? Many times. Her face crumpled, but there was no sign of remorse, only frustration. A few, she said finally. I don't know. 3, maybe 4. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. Unbelievable, I muttered. I didn't plan for this to happen, she said quickly. I never meant to hurt you. You didn't mean to hurt me? I repeated, my voice rising. Ashley, you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything we built together. And for what? For some guy who probably doesn't even care about you the way I did. She flinched at that, but I didn't let up. Do you even realize what you've done? To me? To Ethan? Or are you too wrapped up in your little fantasy to care? Her face twisted with anger. Don't bring Ethan into this. This has nothing to do with him. It has everything to do with him, I shouted. He deserves better than this. He deserves parents who respect each other, not whatever the hell this is. Ashley stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm done, she said. You clearly don't want to fix this. All you want to do is punish me. Fix this, I repeated, laughing bitterly. Ashley, you broke this. And the only reason I'm still standing here is because I'm trying to figure out if there's anything left to save. She didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed her phone and walked out the front door, slamming it behind her. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Ashley had made her choice. Now, it was time for me to make mine. Ashley's dramatic exit left the house eerily quiet. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the door she'd slammed behind her, the sound still reverberating in my head. It wasn't just the door she'd walked out of. It felt like she'd walked out of our marriage, our family, and the life we'd built together. I sat down at the dining table, the same one where she'd confessed to months of lies and betrayal just minutes earlier. My hands shook as I scrolled through the photos I'd taken of her and Eric. There they were, in black and white. Undeniable proof of her infidelity. Proof that the woman I thought I knew had chosen someone else, not just physically but emotionally. A thought struck me then. If I had these photos, and if Brad had seen her with Eric, who else knew? How long had I been the clueless husband, oblivious while everyone around us saw the truth? My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my spiral. It was a message from Kayla, Ashley's so-called best friend. Kayla, hey Jake, I just wanted to check in. Ashley said you two had a fight. Is everything okay? I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. Ashley had gone running to Kayla, of course. She always did when we argued. But this time was different. Kayla had been her alibi for months, the name she'd thrown around whenever I questioned her late nights or secretive behavior. How much did Kayla know? Without thinking, I replied, me. Did you know? The response came almost immediately. Kayla. Know what? Me about Ashley and Eric. Don't play dumb with me, Kayla. She's been using you as her excuse for months. The typing indicator appeared, then stopped, then started again. Finally, a response. Kayla, Jake, I don't want to get involved in this. It's between you and Ashley. That was all I needed to see. Kayla wasn't denying it. My suspicion turned to certainty. She'd known all along and covered for her. I tossed my phone onto the table, disgusted. I couldn't believe the level of betrayal. It wasn't just Ashley. It was the people around her, the people I'd trusted, enabling her lies. The hours crawled by. I busied myself with mindless tasks, tidying the kitchen, folding laundry, anything to keep my hands moving and my mind from spiraling. But every time I stopped, her words came back to haunt me. I don't love you anymore. By the time Ashley came home, it was nearly midnight. I heard her keys jingling in the lock, her soft footsteps as she entered the house. She didn't say a word as she walked into the living room, setting her purse down on the coffee table. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Where were you? She glanced at me, her expression blank. Out. With him? I asked, my voice cold. She hesitated, then shrugged. Why does it matter? That was it. The last thread of patience I'd been holding on to snapped. It matters because I'm still your husband, Ashley, I shouted. Because we have a child sleeping upstairs who deserves better than this circus you've dragged us into. It matters because you stood in front of me and lied for months while sneaking around with some guy you reconnected with. And now you're acting like you're not accountable for any of it. She flinched at my outburst but quickly recovered, her face hardening into that same infuriating mask of indifference. I told you the truth, Jake. I didn't have to, but I did. What more do you want from me? I want you to show some damn remorse. I snapped. You don't even seem to care about what you've done, Ashley. You've turned our marriage into a joke, and you're standing here acting like I'm overreacting. Her eyes narrowed. Maybe I don't care, she said, her voice sharp and cutting. Maybe I'm tired of feeling like the bad guy all the time. You're not perfect, Jake. You're controlling, you're critical, and frankly, you stopped making me feel anything years ago. Her words were like daggers, each one twisting deeper than the last. But this time, instead of breaking me, they fueled something else, resolve. I see, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. This is who you are now. A liar, a cheater, and a coward who can't even take responsibility for her actions. She scoffed. You don't know what it's like to feel invisible in your own marriage, Jake. To go to bed every night wondering if you even matter to the person lying next to you. And instead of talking to me about it, you chose him, I said, shaking my head. You chose to betray me, Ashley. You chose to destroy what we had instead of fighting for it. Maybe there wasn't anything left to fight for, she shot back. The silence that followed was deafening. We stood there, staring at each other, the weight of her words sinking in. Then there's nothing left to say, I said finally, my voice cold. I'm done, Ashley. Done pretending this can be fixed. Done giving you chances you don't deserve. For the first time, her confidence faltered. What does that mean? It means I'm filing for divorce, I said, the words coming out steady and final. And I'm fighting for custody of Ethan. He deserves stability, something you clearly can't provide. Her face went pale. Jake, you don't mean that. I've never been more serious about anything in my life, I said, walking past her toward the stairs. Good night, Ashley. I didn't look back as I climbed the stairs, but I heard her muffled sobs as I closed the bedroom door behind me. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't expected, relief. The decision was made. The line was drawn. It was time to rebuild, without her. The morning after I told Ashley I wanted a divorce, the house was a war zone of silence. No slamming doors, no shouting matches. Just the unbearable quiet of two people who knew the end had arrived, but hadn't yet decided how to dismantle everything. Ethan's laughter drifted down the stairs as he played with his action figures, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath his roof. I envied his innocence. He didn't know that his world was about to split in two, and I wasn't sure how to protect him from the wreckage. Ashley came downstairs dressed for the day, her makeup flawless, her demeanor eerily calm. It was like the meltdown from the night before had been erased, replaced with the cold composure of someone planning their next move. "We need to talk," she said, her voice even but firm. I was standing by the kitchen counter, nursing a mug of coffee I didn't want. "What's there to talk about, Ashley?" I said what I needed to say. "You can't just drop the D word and walk away like that," she snapped, the calm facade cracking for a moment. "We have a child, Jake. You can't just decide to tear this family apart." I set the mug down, turning to face her. "I'm not the one who tore this family apart, Ashley. That was you the moment you decided your feelings for Eric were more important than your commitment to me." Her lips tightened, but she didn't argue. "I made mistakes, Jake. I'll admit that. But you don't just throw away 7 years of marriage because of a rough patch." "A rough patch?" I said, my voice rising. "That's what you're calling months of lying, sneaking around, and cheating? A rough patch?" Her jaw clenched, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she shifted tactics. "Do you really think divorce is the answer? What about Ethan? Do you think splitting up his parents is what's best for him?" The audacity of her using Ethan as a shield made my blood boil. "Don't you dare try to use Ethan to guilt me into staying in a marriage you've already destroyed. He deserves better than this. Better than us fighting every night. Better than parents who can't even look each other in the eye." She looked away, her shoulders stiff. "You're just angry right now. You're not thinking clearly." "No, Ashley," I said firmly. "For the first time, I'm thinking very clearly. I've spent months trying to figure out what went wrong, blaming myself for your behavior, hoping you'd come back to me. But I see now that the only person who's been trying to save this marriage is me. And I'm done." Her composure cracked. "So that's it? You're giving up? Throwing me away like I mean nothing to you?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Ashley, you threw yourself away. You made your choices, and now you're trying to act like the victim. I'm not falling for it." She stared at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But there was no apology in them, only frustration. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Now we figure out how to make this as painless as possible for Ethan. I'll be filing for divorce this week. We'll work out custody arrangements and figure out who's staying in the house. Beyond that, I don't care what you do." Her tears finally spilled over, but they didn't move me the way they once would have. "I never wanted this," she said, her voice trembling. "Neither did I," said quietly. "But here we are." She left the room without another word, retreating upstairs. I stood there, staring into the middle distance, trying to process what had just happened. For the rest of the day, we avoided each other like strangers. I took Ethan to the park, desperate for a sense of normalcy, while Ashley locked herself in the bedroom. On the drive home, Ethan asked, "Why didn't Mommy come with us today?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing a smile. "Mommy wasn't feeling well, buddy. She needed some rest." His little face crinkled in concern. "Will she come next time?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. "We'll see." When we got back, Ashley was in the living room, scrolling on her phone like nothing had happened. She glanced up as Ethan ran to her, throwing his arms around her waist. She hugged him back, but her eyes met mine over his head. For a split second, I thought I saw regret there. Or maybe it was just my imagination. That night, I started looking into lawyers. The realization hit me hard as I scrolled through websites and reviews. This was real. There was no coming back from this. Ashley might have set the fire, but I was the one walking away from the ashes. The next day began with an uneasy calm, the kind that warns of a storm brewing. Ashley avoided me completely, retreating into the bedroom or distracting herself with Ethan whenever we were in the same room. I let her. The truth was, I didn't have the energy to fight anymore. My focus had shifted to something more important: securing my future with Ethan. By mid-afternoon, I was on the phone with a divorce lawyer. Her name was Melissa Carter, and she came highly recommended by a friend. "Jake, I'll be honest with you," Melissa said after I explained the situation. "Infidelity cases are messy, especially when custody is involved. But if you can prove that your wife's behavior is negatively impacting your son's stability, you'll have a strong case." "I have proof," I said. "Photos, texts, even a witness. My neighbor saw her with the guy she's been sneaking around with." "That's a good start," she said. "But tread carefully. Ashley might not take kindly to being confronted with evidence, and things could escalate." I thanked her and hung up, my mind spinning. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was determined. I wasn't going to let Ashley twist this narrative or use Ethan as leverage to avoid consequences. That evening, as Ethan played in his room, Ashley and I finally collided. She was in the kitchen, slicing vegetables for dinner, when I walked in. "We need to talk," I said, leaning against the counter. She didn't look up. "About what?" "You know about what," I said. "I spoke to a lawyer today." Her knife froze mid-slice. Slowly, she set it down and turned to face me. "You're really doing this?" "I'm really doing this," I said, my voice calm but resolute. Her eyes narrowed. "So that's it? You're going to drag me through a messy divorce because you can't handle the fact that our marriage didn't work?" "No, Ashley," I said sharply. "I'm going to divorce you because you cheated on me and destroyed any chance we had of fixing this." She stepped closer, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "And what about Ethan? Do you think this is what's best for him? Ripping apart his family? That's rich, coming from you," I shot back. "You weren't thinking about Ethan when you were sneaking around with Eric. You weren't thinking about him when you lied to me every single day. So don't stand there and pretend you care about his well-being now." Her face flushed with anger, but there was something else there too: fear. "You don't get to decide what's best for him, Jake. You think you're the perfect father, but let's not forget who's been doing most of the parenting while you're off playing the martyr." I laughed bitterly. "Parenting? You mean shoving a tablet in his hands while you're texting Eric under the table?" "Yeah, Ashley, you're mother of the year." Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with fury. "You're disgusting," she hissed. "No, Ashley," I said, stepping closer. "What's disgusting is you standing here, trying to rewrite history like I'm the villain. You're the one who broke this family, not me." She opened her mouth to fire back, but before she could, Ethan's voice rang out from the hallway. "Mom? Dad?" We both turned to see him standing there, clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. His wide eyes darted between us, filled with confusion. "Why are you yelling?" Ashley immediately softened, rushing over to kneel in front of him. "Oh, baby, we're not yelling. Mommy and Daddy are just talking. Okay?" Ethan frowned. It didn't sound like talking. I crouched down next to him, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Hey, buddy. Everything's okay. Mommy and I are just working through some grown-up stuff. Don't worry about it. Okay?" He nodded slowly, but his eyes lingered on Ashley. "Are you mad at Mommy?" My heart broke a little at his question, but I forced a smile. "No, bud. I'm not mad at Mommy. We're just trying to figure some things out." Ashley looked at me then, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Ethan gave us a wary look before shuffling back to his room. The moment he was out of earshot, Ashley turned to me. "Don't you dare make me the bad guy in front of him," she said in a low voice. "I don't have to," I said coldly. "You're doing a fine job of that on your own." I left her standing there, gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Upstairs, I found Ethan sitting on his bed, holding his dinosaur tightly. "Hey, champ," I said, sitting next to him. "Everything okay?" He nodded but didn't look at me. "Are you and Mommy going to stop being married?" My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't ready for this conversation, but I couldn't lie to him. "Things are going to change, buddy," I said carefully. "But no matter what, Mommy and I both love you so much. That's never going to change." You're the most important thing in the world to us. He looked up at me, his big brown eyes filled with worry. Promise. I promise, I said, pulling him into a hug. As I held him, I felt a strange mixture of anger and resolve. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for him, for his stability, his future. Ashley thought she could play the victim, manipulate the narrative to suit her needs. But I wasn't going to let her. This was far from over. The days that followed were a blur of strategy and confrontation. Ashley and I existed in the same house, but it felt like we were on opposite sides of a battlefield. Every conversation was laced with tension. Every interaction a careful calculation of who would make the next move. I began documenting everything. Every time Ashley left the house without explanation. Every cryptic text I could catch a glimpse of. Every moment she spent glued to her phone instead of engaging with Ethan. Melissa had told me this would be important, and I wasn't going to let anything slip through the cracks. Ashley, for her part, seemed to realize I was serious about the divorce. She tried to regain some control of the situation, switching tactics from outright hostility to a sickening sweetness that made my skin crawl. Jake, she said one evening as we sat in tense silence at the dinner table, Ethan between us. Do we really have to involve lawyers? Can't we just figure this out ourselves? I didn't take the bait. Ashley, you've given me no reason to believe you'll be honest or fair. So no, we can't just figure this out. Her smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. Fine, she said lightly. But remember, Jake, divorces aren't just about splitting things 50-50. Custody is a whole other ballgame. I set my fork down, my appetite gone. If you think for a second that I'm going to let you use Ethan as leverage, you're delusional. Her eyes flashed. I'm his mother. Don't forget that. And I'm his father, I said firmly. The one who's been here for him every day while you've been off with Eric. Don't forget that. She didn't respond, but the look she gave me was venomous. Later that night, I overheard her on the phone in the bedroom. Her voice was hushed, but the walls weren't thick enough to hide her tone. A mix of frustration and desperation. I don't know what he's planning, she said. He's being so damn stubborn. I can't deal with this much longer. No, I haven't told him. Are you insane? He'd use it against me. I froze. Told me what? I waited until she went to the bathroom, then crept into the bedroom. Her phone was on the nightstand, face down. I picked it up, my hands shaking. She'd set a passcode, something she hadn't bothered with before. Of course she had. I placed the phone back where I found it and left the room, my mind racing. What was she hiding now? And how far was she willing to go to keep it from me? The next morning, I got my answer. Ashley came downstairs looking unusually composed, her hair and makeup done like she was heading to a meeting. She set a cup of coffee in front of me with a forced smile. We need to talk, she said. I braced myself. Go ahead. She sat across from me, folding her hands neatly on the table. I've been thinking about what you said, about Ethan, and I want to make this easier for him. I raised an eyebrow. Easier how? She hesitated, and for a moment, I thought I saw genuine fear in her eyes. But then she squared her shoulders and spoke. I'll agree to shared custody, she said carefully, but only if you agree not to dig into my personal life. No dragging Eric into this. No trying to make me look bad in court. I stared at her, stunned by the audacity. You think you're in a position to bargain with me? I'm trying to protect Ethan, she said, her voice tight. And myself. This doesn't have to get ugly, Jake. We can keep it civil for him. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. Civil? After everything you've done, you want to talk about keeping it civil? Her mask cracked, and her true emotions spilled out. Anger, frustration, fear. Fine, you want to play dirty? Go ahead. But you'll regret it, Jake. I promise you that. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. The only thing I regret is trusting you in the first place. Before she could respond, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. I needed air, space, anything to clear my head. As I drove aimlessly around town, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Melissa. Melissa, call me when you can. There's something you need to know. I pulled into a parking lot and dialed her number, my heart pounding. Jake, Melissa said when she picked up, her tone serious. I've been digging into Ashley's financials, like you asked. There are some irregularities. What kind of irregularities? I asked, gripping the steering wheel. Large cash withdrawals, unaccounted expenses. And there's something else. She recently opened a separate bank account. One you're not tied to. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. What does that mean? It could mean a lot of things, Melissa said carefully. But combined with her behavior and the affair, it's worth looking into. She might be planning to leave or trying to hide assets before the divorce. I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. Ashley's lies ran deeper than I thought, and now it wasn't just about infidelity. She was planning something, and whatever it wasn't good. When I got home, Ashley was in the living room, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. She looked up as I walked in, her expression unreadable. "You're back," she said casually. I stood there for a moment, looking at her, the woman who had once been my partner, my confidant. Now she was a stranger. And one thing was clear. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was war. After Melissa's call, everything fell into place. Ashley wasn't just hiding her affair. She was preparing for something bigger. The separate bank account, the financial withdrawals, the calculated way she was trying to corner me in the divorce. It all pointed to one conclusion. She was planning to cut and run. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I started gathering my weapons. If she wanted to play dirty, I was ready to meet her in the mud. I spent hours on the phone with Melissa, going over every detail, strategizing my next moves. "You need more than circumstantial evidence," Melissa advised. "If she's planning to hide assets or move money, we'll need solid proof to bring to court." "I'll get it," I promised. The first step was gaining access to Ashley's private account. It wasn't easy. She was careful with her phone, rarely leaving it unattended. But desperation makes people sloppy. Late one night, after she'd had a few glasses of wine and fallen asleep on the couch, I saw my chance. I took her phone from the coffee table and used her fingerprint while she slept. My heart pounded as I navigated her banking app. The screen lit up with her transactions, and what I saw made my stomach churn. Multiple large withdrawals over the past 2 months, all in even amounts. Thousands of dollars siphoned into an account I didn't recognize. I took photos of the screen with my own phone, documenting everything. There was one transaction in particular that stood out, a recent payment to a real estate agency. I stared at it, my mind racing. Was she planning to buy a place for herself? For her and Eric? The betrayal deepened with every discovery, but I kept going, determined to see it through. When I returned her phone to the table and covered her with a blanket, I felt no guilt. She'd forfeited her right to privacy the moment she started plotting behind my back. The next day, I met with Melissa, laying everything out. The photos, the receipts, the details from her account. Melissa nodded, her expression grim but impressed. "This changes everything," she said. "If she's hiding money or planning to move without informing the court, it'll work in your favor. But you need to be ready for her to retaliate." "I'm ready," I said. That night, I tested the waters. Ashley was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, probably texting Eric again when I brought up the real estate payment. "So," I said casually, leaning against the counter, "thinking about buying property?" Her head snapped up, her face pale. "What are you talking about?" I smirked. "The payment to the real estate agency. It's funny. I don't remember us discussing a move." She tried to recover, laughing nervously. "Oh, that's nothing, just a consultation. I thought it might be smart to explore options, with everything going on." "Sure," I said, nodding slowly. "That makes sense. Except consultations don't usually cost thousands of dollars, Ashley." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw panic flash across her face. But then she crossed her arms, her usual arrogance returning. "You've been snooping through my stuff, haven't you? That's low, Jake. Even for you. Don't turn this around on me," I snapped. "You're the one making shady financial moves behind my back. What's the plan, Ashley? Were you going to empty our accounts and disappear? Maybe take Ethan with you?" Her mouth opened, then closed, as if she didn't know what to say. For once, she looked genuinely cornered. "You're paranoid," she said finally, her voice shaking. "I'm not doing anything illegal. You're just looking for excuses to paint me as the bad guy. I don't need excuses, I said coldly. You've given me plenty of evidence all on your own. She scoffed, grabbing her phone and storming out of the kitchen. But I'd gotten what I wanted. Confirmation that I was onto something. The next few days were a delicate balancing act. Ashley grew increasingly suspicious, watching me with narrowed eyes every time I entered the room. But I kept my head down, playing the part of the tired, defeated husband. I let her think she was still in control. Then, on Friday afternoon, the bomb dropped. Melissa called, her voice urgent. Jake, I found something. Ashley signed a lease for an apartment downtown. It starts next week. My stomach twisted. She's leaving, I said, the words bitter in my mouth. It looks that way, Melissa said. But here's the kicker. The lease is in her name only. She hasn't mentioned Ethan anywhere in the paperwork. For a moment I couldn't speak. The idea that Ashley might leave Ethan behind, that she'd willingly abandon him, was unthinkable. This works in your favor, Melissa said gently. It shows she's not prioritizing custody. But you need to be prepared for whatever happens next. She might try to frame this as you pushing her out. I hung up, my mind racing. If Ashley thought she could just slip away without consequences, she was wrong. That night, I confronted her again, this time with no pretense of civility. I know about the apartment, I said, standing in the doorway of the bedroom where she was folding laundry. Her hands froze mid-motion. What? The lease, I said. Downtown. Starts next week. Care to explain? Her face turned red, but whether it was from anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. You had no right. I have every right, I interrupted. You're planning to leave, Ashley. What's the end game here? Running off to play house with Eric? Abandoning your son in the process? She dropped the shirt she was holding, her eyes blazing. Don't you dare accuse me of abandoning Ethan. I would never. Then why isn't his name on the lease? I asked, cutting her off again. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The silence spoke volumes. You're unbelievable, I said, shaking my head. You've lied, cheated, stolen, and now you're trying to walk away from the mess you made. But guess what, Ashley? You don't get to walk away from this. Not without consequences. She stared at me, her face a mix of anger and something else. Fear. For the first time, it felt like the power had shifted. You want a war? She said finally, her voice low and venomous. Fine. You'll get one. I met her glare with one of my own. Bring it. This wasn't just about ending the marriage anymore. It was about justice, about protecting Ethan, and about making sure Ashley couldn't rewrite the story to suit her lies. The gloves were officially off. The next morning, the tension in the house was unbearable. It was like living in a pressure cooker, the slightest movement or word threatening to make everything explode. Ethan was the only light in the chaos, his cheerful chatter a painful reminder of what was at stake. Ashley stayed in the bedroom most of the day, her door closed. I knew she was stewing, plotting her next move, but I wasn't waiting for her to strike first. Melissa and I had already set the wheels in motion. By Monday morning, I had filed for divorce. The petition included all the evidence Melissa and I had gathered. The photos of Ashley and Eric, the bank records showing her secret withdrawals, and her new apartment lease. Most importantly, we filed for sole custody of Ethan. I wasn't playing games anymore. I handed Ashley the papers that evening. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling on her phone, when I walked in and set the envelope in front of her. What's this? She asked, barely glancing at it. Open it, I said, standing over her. She gave me a wary look but complied, pulling out the documents. As she read through them, her face went pale. You filed for divorce? She said, her voice trembling. I told you I would, I replied coldly. Her eyes flicked to the custody section, and she let out a bitter laugh. Sole custody? Are you kidding me, Jake? You actually think a judge is going to give you full custody of Ethan? I think a judge will see the evidence and make the right decision, I said, crossing my arms. You've been lying, cheating, and planning to leave without any consideration for him. That's not what a good parent does. Her composure cracked, and she shot up from the couch, the papers crumpled in her fist. You don't get to take my son away from me, she screamed, her voice shaking with rage. I'm his mother, Jake. You can't erase me from his life. I'm not trying to erase you, I said evenly. I'm trying to protect him. He deserves stability, Ashley. Something you clearly can't provide. You're such a self-righteous jerk, she spat, tears welling in her eyes. Do you have any idea how hard it's been for me? How lonely I've been? I made mistakes. Yes, but you're not innocent in this either. Her words were like static noise I couldn't bring myself to care about anymore. I'd heard her excuses, her justifications, too many times. You can say whatever you want, I said, but this isn't about you or me anymore. It's about Ethan. And I'll do whatever it takes to make sure he's okay. She threw the papers onto the coffee table and stormed out of the room, slamming the bedroom door behind her. The sound echoed through the house, but for the first time, I didn't feel shaken. The next week was a flurry of legal proceedings and tense silences. Ashley tried to act like everything was normal in front of Ethan, but her mood swings gave her away. She alternated between icy stares and sudden outbursts, clearly struggling to maintain control. Then came the custody hearing. Melissa was relentless in presenting our case. She laid out every piece of evidence, painting a clear picture of Ashley's deceit and instability. The photos, the financial withdrawals, the apartment lease, it all worked in our favor. Ashley's lawyer tried to fight back, claiming I was emotionally manipulative and controlling, but they had no proof. And when Ashley took the stand, her mask of composure finally cracked. She fumbled through her answers, her temper flaring under cross-examination. When asked about the apartment lease, she stammered, "It was just a backup plan. I wasn't going to leave Ethan." Melissa pounced. "So you were planning to leave your husband, but you had no intention of taking your son with you? Is that correct?" Ashley faltered, her face flushing. "That's not. I didn't mean it like that." The damage was done. By the end of the hearing, the judge ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody of Ethan, with Ashley receiving limited visitation until she could prove her stability. The victory was bittersweet. While I was relieved to have secured Ethan's future, the reality of what Ashley had become was still hard to swallow. The night after the ruling, Ashley packed her things and moved into her downtown apartment. She didn't say goodbye to me, only to Ethan, holding him tightly and whispering promises she might not be able to keep. "Are you leaving, Mommy?" Ethan asked, his voice small. She smiled through her tears. "Just for a little while, sweetheart. I'll see you soon. Okay?" He nodded, but his eyes were full of questions he couldn't yet ask. After she left, the house felt impossibly quiet. Ethan went to bed early, exhausted from the emotional weight of the day. I sat alone in the living room, staring at the empty space where Ashley's things used to be. It was over. The war, the lies, the betrayal done. But the scars it left behind would take time to heal. Later that night, I went into Ethan's room and sat by his bed, watching him sleep. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. We'd been through hell, but we were still standing. And now it was time to rebuild. Not for Ashley. Not for the marriage that had died long before I realized it. For Ethan. And for myself.